Why are you acting like this matters so much? She asked after ignoring me all week. I smiled and said nothing. Then I walked away completely. Months later, she tried to restart everything but realized I was already done for good. Why are you acting like this matters so much? She asked it the way you'd ask someone why they're worked up over a parking ticket. Casual, unbothered, almost annoyed that I even had a reaction. I didn't answer. I just smiled. Not the warm kind, not the fake kind either. The kind that comes when something inside you finally stops fighting and goes completely quiet. She didn't know it then, but that smile was the last real thing I ever gave her. And when I walked out of that apartment 3 minutes later, I didn't look back. Not because I was being dramatic, not because I wanted her to chase me, but because for the first time in almost 2 years, I didn't feel the pull anymore. That pull that had kept me orbiting her like I had no gravity of my own. It was gone. And standing there in the elevator, watching the doors close between us, I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. Some people don't lose you through a single explosion. They lose you one quiet dismissal at a time. And by the time they realize you're gone, you've already been gone for months. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Let me back up just a little. Not too far. Just enough so you understand what that question actually meant. And why 7 words from someone I loved were enough to end everything cleanly. I was 26. She was 24. We'd been together for almost 2 years. Real time, not situationship math. Alone. Smart, quick, magnetic. The kind of person who makes every room feel like the most interesting place to be. She had this way of looking at you when you were talking, fully, completely, like your words were the only ones worth hearing. It was intoxicating. And I fell for her the way most people fall for people like her. Fast, without fully realizing it was happening until I was already in deep. We lived about 12 blocks apart in Brooklyn. Both worked in the city. Both had our own thing going on. And for a long stretch of it, that was actually great. She had her world. I had mine. And where they overlapped, that was us. Clean, real, easy. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. I didn't realize it then. But something beneath the surface had been quietly shifting from very early on. And I was so busy enjoying the good parts that I kept letting the warning signs drift by like text messages I'd deal with later. The first sign I ignored was about 8 months in. She went quiet for 3 days after a minor disagreement about weekend plans. Not cold exactly, just absent. Like she'd stepped slightly out of reach without physically going anywhere. When she came back, it was like nothing happened. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just warmth, as if a reset button had been quietly pressed. She brought coffee, made a joke, asked about something I'd mentioned the week before like she'd stored it carefully and was retrieving it now. And it was disarming, honestly, because you want to say something. You want to ask where she went. But she's being so warm and attentive that bringing up the absence feels like kicking over the table at a dinner that's suddenly going well. So I told myself she just needed space to process things. I told myself that was reasonable. And maybe it was once. But a pattern was already starting to form that I didn't want to see. Looking back now, I think I didn't want to see it because seeing it would have meant I had to decide something. And at the time, I wasn't ready to decide. So I filed it away. I moved on. I didn't realize it then. But that moment, that first reset, changed the unspoken contract between us. It told her, without a single word, that she could disappear and I would wait. That I would adjust. That I would absorb. That the discomfort was mine to carry, not hers to explain. The second time she went quiet, it lasted 5 days. This time there wasn't even a disagreement. I'd asked if we were still on for Thursday. She'd read it. No response. Thursday came. I waited. No response. Friday, she texted me like nothing had happened. A meme, of all things. A screenshot of something funny she'd seen, with a little caption. Like we'd been texting all week normally, and she was just sharing a moment. I sat staring at my phone for a full minute. Then I laughed it off, responded, and let it go. And she never explained it. And I never asked. Because I didn't want to seem like I was making a big deal out of it. Because I didn't want to seem needy. Because I didn't want to seem like I was too much. There it is. That's the sentence that kept me stuck longer than anything else. I didn't want to seem like I was too much. So I made myself smaller. And smaller. And smaller. Until I was basically a footnote in my own relationship. And the worst part? I did it so gradually that I didn't even notice the shrinking. I just kept adjusting my expectations downward, one small increment at a time, until my baseline for what felt normal had shifted so far from where it started that I couldn't have found my way back to it without a map. Around the 14-month mark, I started noticing other things. The way she'd get genuinely excited when Thatcher, her coworker, texted her at dinner. The way her whole face changed. The posture shift. The way she'd laugh differently on those calls than she laughed with me. Not suspicious, maybe, but different. The kind of different that puts a small stone in your chest that you can't quite name. The way plans between us had slowly become suggestions rather than commitments. She'd say, let's do Saturday, and then Saturday would arrive, and I'd get a, ugh, I'm so tired, can we reschedule? At 4 p.m. Once, twice, 5 times. At some point, I stopped making plans and just waited to be invited into her schedule. That should have broken something in me. It did, actually. It just broke quietly. The kind of break that doesn't feel like anything in the moment, but adds up over time into something that can't be undone. I mentioned it once, the canceled plans, the last-minute changes. We were at dinner, somewhere in the West Village, and I kept my voice very even. I said it felt like I was always fitting into the margins of her week rather than being a real part of it. I said I wanted more consistency. She put her fork down. She didn't get defensive exactly. She got patient in that way that's somehow worse than defensive. Like she was a teacher and I was a student who hadn't quite grasped the material yet. You know how unpredictable my schedule is, she said. I'm not doing this on purpose. I just have a lot going on. And I said, I know it's okay. It wasn't okay, but I said it anyway. And she picked her fork back up and the conversation moved on. And I sat there with the stone still in my chest, having finally named it, and then immediately buried it again. Then came the week that ended everything. I need you to understand how ordinary the start of it was. Sunday night, I texted her to say I'd had a rough day. Nothing dramatic, just one of those days where everything feels slightly tilted and you want to hear a familiar voice, and asked if she wanted to grab food. She left me on read. I figured she was busy or already asleep. I told myself it was fine. Monday, nothing. No good morning, no check-in, nothing. Tuesday, I send a lighter text. Something easy, no emotional weight. A photo of something I'd seen on the walk to the subway that I knew would make her laugh. Nothing. Wednesday, I called. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I just set my phone down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Thursday, I texted one more time. Not begging. Not dramatic. Just, hey, everything okay? Haven't heard from you. No response. Friday morning I woke up and realized I hadn't slept well in 3 days. Not because I was devastated yet, but because the uncertainty was doing something to my nervous system that I couldn't quite name. That low-grade hum of not knowing. The checking my phone every 20 minutes thing. The replaying of our last conversation to find whatever I'd said wrong. The convincing myself she was just overwhelmed and would resurface and it would be fine. And then Friday evening, at 7:43 p.m., I remember the time because I'd been watching the clock more than I wanted to admit. She texted me. A photo. A picture of a sunset she'd seen from some rooftop somewhere in Manhattan. Warm light, dramatic clouds. With a caption, this city, honestly. That was it. No explanation. No sorry I've been MIA. No, I know I've been quiet. I owe you a call. Just a rooftop sunset photo like we'd been texting all week, and she was just sharing a pretty moment. I stared at it for a long time. The photo was beautiful, technically. Objectively beautiful. And something about that made the whole thing worse. She'd had a whole week. She'd been on rooftops watching sunsets. She'd been living a full life. And I'd spent 4 days wondering if I'd said something wrong. And something shifted in me. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Something quieter than both of those. A door somewhere in my chest that I hadn't even known was open slowly began to close. I didn't respond. Not that night. Not the next day. For the first time, I didn't perform the role of the person who waits and then acts like the waiting didn't happen. She called Saturday afternoon. I let it ring. I sat on my couch and watched my phone light up and I let it ring. That was new. I had never done that before. She called again an hour later. This time I picked up. Hey, she said, bright and easy. Like we'd talked yesterday. Like the week hadn't happened. Hey, I said. You okay? You've been quiet. And there it was. She said it without any irony. Without any awareness. You've been quiet. Me. I had been quiet. I was the one who'd been quiet. I actually had to set the phone down for a second and take one deliberate breath before I picked it back up. Because if I'd responded in that moment, I would have said something sharp. And I didn't want sharp. I wanted honest. I'm fine, I said. You don't sound fine, she said. What's going on? And she said it with genuine concern. That was the thing about Aloan. The concern was always real. The interest was always real. She wasn't a manipulative person. She wasn't scheming. She was just someone who turned the warmth on and off without fully understanding what that cost the person on the receiving end. Can we talk in person? I asked. Sure, come over now if you want. I drove over. That was probably my first mistake. Because being in her apartment, surrounded by her things, that specific quality of late afternoon light through her east-facing windows, the smell of whatever candle she always burned, made it harder to be clear. She was warm. She was charming. She made me coffee without asking because she knew how I took it. She sat across from me on the couch with her legs folded under her and looked at me with those eyes that made you feel like the conversation you were having was the most important one in the world. That was her superpower, honestly. The ability to make you feel completely seen when it was convenient for her, and completely invisible when it wasn't. I told her it had been a hard week. I told her the silence had bothered me more than I expected. I tried to say it without accusation in my voice, without the spike of frustration I'd been sitting with for days. I said I'd felt like I didn't exist in her world for 7 days, and I didn't understand why. I said I wasn't trying to make her feel attacked. I said I just needed to understand what had happened. I said, when someone you love goes quiet for a week with no explanation, it does something to you. It makes you anxious. It makes you start filling in the blanks yourself. And the blanks you fill in aren't usually kind. I kept checking my phone. I said, I kept replaying our last conversation, looking for whatever I'd said wrong. I called you Wednesday, and it went to voicemail, and I sat there for 20 minutes trying to figure out what I'd done. And I hadn't done anything. I said all of it calmly, carefully. The way you say something when you've been thinking about it for days and you're trying your hardest to communicate it rather than weaponize it. She listened, or at least she looked like she was listening. Her face was open. Her eyes were on me. And for a moment, I thought she was going to say something real, something that would land us somewhere honest. And then she said it. Why are you acting like this matters so much? 7 words, delivered with a slight tilt of her head, like she was genuinely confused by the weight I was attaching to this. Like caring about a week of silence from your girlfriend of almost 2 years was an overreaction she hadn't expected from me. I was just busy, she added. Everyone gets busy. It wasn't personal. You're being really sensitive about this. And then she did something I'll never forget. She reached over and squeezed my hand. The way you'd squeeze the hand of a child who was working themselves up over something that didn't warrant it. Gentle, reassuring, condescending, all at the same time. You're okay, she said. 2 words. You're okay. Like she was closing the chapter. Like she just talked me down off something small. I sat with that for a moment. The squeeze. The tone. The question. Why are you acting like this matters so much? And here's the thing nobody tells you about moments like that. They don't feel dramatic when they happen. There's no swelling music. No sharp pain. Just a quiet, clean sensation of something clicking into place. Like a lock turning. Not closing. Opening. Like the part of me that had been waiting. Always waiting. For her to confirm that my feelings were valid suddenly stopped waiting. Stopped asking. Just received the answer it had been given. I looked at her. I smiled. Not a performance. Not a message I was trying to send. Just a reflex that came from somewhere below conscious thought. Something that said, I hear you. I finally, completely hear you. And we are done here. She tilted her head a little more. What? She said. I stood up. I picked up my jacket from the arm of the chair. I took a look around the apartment. The candle. The afternoon light. The way she was sitting there looking at me with that patient, slightly puzzled expression. Nothing, I said. Where are you going? Home, I said. Are you seriously doing this right now? I came over to have a real conversation, she said. You can't just leave. I looked at her one more time, still smiling slightly. Take care of yourself, Eloan. And I walked out. I didn't rush. I didn't slam the door. I pulled it shut quietly behind me, the way you close a door when you don't want to wake someone sleeping. Careful. Final. I want to be honest about what the next few days looked like. Because if I tell you I felt immediately free and certain and clear-headed, I'd be lying to you. The truth is messier than that. I got home that night and sat in my apartment for a long time without turning on any lights. Just sat there in the dark and let everything be exactly as heavy as it was. Part of me expected my phone to buzz. Part of me wanted it to buzz. Not because I wanted to go back, but because some part of my brain was still wired to need the confirmation that she'd noticed. That her indifference had a limit somewhere. That if I got far enough away, something real would break through the surface. It didn't buzz that night. It didn't buzz Sunday. Sunday I went for a run. Long one. The kind where you don't think about a destination, you just go. I ended up somewhere in Prospect Park, sitting on a bench, watching a group of kids chase a dog in circles. And something about the ordinary joy of it, the dog absolutely delirious with purpose, the kids laughing at nothing in particular, did something to the weight in my chest. Didn't remove it, just made it feel proportionate. Like, yes, this is real. And also the world is still going. Both things are true. Monday, Thatcher texted me. We become genuine friends independently of Alohan, which was either fortunate or strange, depending on how you looked at it, asking if I wanted to grab a beer. I said yes. I didn't tell him what had happened. We just sat at a bar on Smith Street and talked about other things. A terrible action movie we'd both wasted 2 hours on. His fantasy baseball team. The weird guy in his building who left passive-aggressive notes about elevator usage. And something about that, the ordinariness of it, the complete absence of weight, was exactly what I needed. Life was just continuing to happen. The world hadn't noticed that something had shifted. And there was something deeply, unexpectedly comforting about that. She texted on Tuesday. I think you overreacted, but I'm willing to talk about it if you want. I read it twice. Slowly. I think you overreacted, but I'm willing to talk. There was so much happening in that single sentence. The non-apology. The framing of my response as the problem that needed to be addressed. The performative generosity of being willing to talk, as if she was the measured, reasonable one extending an olive branch to someone who'd gone off the rails. I put my phone face down on my desk. I picked it back up 10 minutes later. I put it face down again. I didn't respond. Not that day. Not the next day. Thursday, she sent another one. Okay, so you're just going to ignore me now? The irony of that question was something I had to breathe through. I wasn't ignoring her to punish her. I wasn't ignoring her to play games. I wasn't calculating the effect of my silence. I was just done. There's a real difference between silence as a weapon and silence as an exit. Mine was an exit. And I think, somewhere, she knew that. Which is why the second text had a different energy than the first. Less patient. A little more rattled around the edges. Here's the part one haven't talked about yet. The part one kept to myself for a long time, even from the people closest to me. 3 months before that week, before the silence, before the rooftop photo, before all of it, I'd found something. Not something you could call definitive. Nothing that would hold up as proof of anything concrete. But something that lodged in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. She'd left her laptop open on my kitchen table one afternoon. I wasn't snooping. I genuinely wasn't. I was reaching past it to grab a glass from the cabinet above, and the screen woke up from sleep. There was a message thread open. Thatcher's name at the top. I only saw 2 lines before the screen went dark again from inactivity. I didn't go looking for more. I stepped back and I picked up my glass and I went into the other room and I told myself I hadn't seen what I'd seen. But those 2 lines, the specific warmth of them, the shorthand that comes from intimacy, the way they spoke to each other like 2 people who had created their own private language, planted something in me I couldn't uproot. I didn't confront her. I didn't have proof of anything I could articulate. And I told myself, maybe enough times to make it feel true, that I could be wrong. That I was probably wrong. That people can have warm friendships, and I was projecting. But I think, on some level I knew. And I think that's part of why her dismissal cut the way it did. Because it wasn't just about 1 week of silence. It was the confirmation of something I'd been feeling in my gut for months. That the distance between us wasn't random or circumstantial. It was by design. And I was the only one in the relationship who hadn't been let in on the design. I spent the next few weeks reorganizing my life in small, specific ways. Not dramatically. Not performatively. I just started filling the space she'd taken up with other things. Real things. The gym, which I'd been half committed to for years in that way where you go twice a week and feel virtuous without seeing any actual change, became something I actually looked forward to. I started waking up earlier without an alarm, which had never happened in my life before. I picked up a project at work I'd been putting off because it was complicated and I'd been telling myself I didn't have the bandwidth. And here's the thing about that project. Once I actually sat down with it, I realized the bandwidth had been there all along. I'd just been redirecting most of my mental energy toward the constant low-level monitoring of a relationship that required it. The checking in, the temperature reading, the assessing of whether things were good or whether something had shifted and I hadn't noticed yet. All of that had been quietly eating through me. And now it stopped. And the things I'd told myself I couldn't focus on, I could suddenly focus on them fine. I started going to this jazz bar on DeKalb on Thursday nights. Bridger, a guy from my building, had invited me months ago, and I kept saying, next time. And it turned into a regular thing with a rotating group of people I was starting to know better. One of those people was Whitaker, who worked in architecture and knew more about the history of Brooklyn brownstones than anyone I'd ever met. Another was a woman named Darby who made documentary films and had a laugh that made strangers turn around to see what was funny. These were just people, normal people with their own complicated lives. But they talked to me like my presence was self-evident, like I didn't need to earn my place at the table by being sufficiently accommodating. And I hadn't realized until then how much I'd forgotten what that felt like. I called my brother more. We'd let that slip over the past year in the way you let things slip when you're focused on someone else. He sounded surprised the first time I called just to talk. "Everything okay?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "I just wanted to catch up." A pause. "Who are you and what have you done with my brother?" he said. And I laughed. "A real one." He told me about his life. I told him about mine. Not the breakup, not at first. Just the regular things. And it struck me that I'd been so inside the bubble of Aloan and me that I'd let entire months of my brother's life go by without properly checking in. None of these things were about getting over Aloan. They were just about me. And slowly, quietly, I started to remember what that felt like. To have my attention pointed inward instead of always outward towards someone who was pointed somewhere else entirely. To make a plan and have it just be a plan, not a plan that might or might not happen depending on someone else's mood. To say yes to things because I wanted to, not because I was filling the silence left by a canceled date. It was small. All of it was small. But small things done consistently are how you rebuild yourself after you've been living in someone else's margins for too long. Around the 6-week mark, Collins reached out. She was a mutual friend, had been close to Aloan first, but we developed a genuinely independent friendship over the past year. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I said yes. We met at a small place in Carroll Gardens on a Sunday morning. She was careful at first, circling the obvious without landing on it. Talking about work, about the neighborhood, about a book she'd been reading. Finally, she set down her cup and said, "She told me you guys ended things." I nodded. "How are you doing with it?" "Better than I expected," I said. And I meant it. Collins looked at me for a long moment. That searching look that close friends have. The one that's checking whether you're being honest or just performing fine. "Can I say something that might be a little uncomfortable?" she said. "Go ahead," I said. "I think you stayed too long," she said. "Not because you're weak or anything like that. You're not. I've always known that about you. But I watched it from the outside for a while. The way she'd be fully lit up around certain people and then come home to you like you were a place to rest. Not a person she was choosing every day. A place she came back to when she needed to feel stable." I sat with that for a moment. "She does care about you," Collins said. "I genuinely believe that. But I think she cares about you the way people care about things they've stopped fully seeing. You know? The way you don't think about the lights until the power goes out. You were the lights," she said. "And she wasn't even turning you on most of the time. She was just glad you were there when she needed you." I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "I know." And I did know. I think I'd known for longer than I'd let myself admit. 2 months after I walked out, Aloan texted again. Not a one-liner this time. A long one. The kind that you can tell took a while to write because the phrasing is too careful, too structured, like every sentence was reviewed before it was sent. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said she realized she'd been dismissive. She said the word dismissive like it had cost her something to type it. She said she missed me. She said she thought we could do better if we really tried. She said she knew she had a pattern of pulling away when things got too real, and she wanted to work on that. She said she didn't want to lose what we had. I read it carefully, the whole thing, and I noticed something as I read it. The message was perfectly constructed to sound like accountability without actually being accountable. She described her behavior in the abstract, a pattern of pulling away, without once acknowledging a specific moment. Without once saying, "I ignored you for a week and then made you feel strange for being hurt by it." Without once saying, "I asked you why you were acting like it mattered. And the truth is it mattered because you matter, and I should have known that." It was the language of someone who had thought carefully about how to sound changed without fully sitting with what they'd done. I recognized it because I'd accepted that language before, more than once. The difference was I could see it clearly now, and seeing it clearly meant I couldn't accept it the way I once had. I thought for a long time about whether to respond. Not because I was tempted to go back. I wasn't. But because I'm not someone who leaves things cleanly unresolved when I have the words to resolve them. I don't ghost as a power play. I believe in saying the thing that needs to be said. So I responded. I kept it short but complete. I told her I'd read everything she wrote. I told her I believed she meant it, at least in the moment she was writing it. I told her the problem wasn't that she'd been imperfect. Everyone is imperfect. I told her the problem was the question. Why are you acting like this matters so much? I told her that question was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Not because it was cruel, but because it revealed something true about how she saw me. That my feelings registered as inconvenient rather than important. That the emotional maintenance of keeping me comfortable had started to feel like a burden to her. And that wasn't something a long text could walk back. Because it wasn't a behavior. It was a worldview. It was the lens she was using. And you can't change a lens with an apology. You have to want to see differently. And I didn't know if she wanted that. And I also knew I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I told her I had no anger toward her. I meant it. I wished her well. I meant that too. Then I put my phone down and went for a walk along the waterfront. October in Brooklyn. Cold, gray, honest. The kind of cold that makes you grateful for your own coat. Your own warmth. The fact that you can generate it yourself. She didn't respond for 3 days. When she did, it was 3 words. I hear you. Nothing more. And I think that was the first genuinely honest thing she'd offered in a long time. No pushback. No reframing. No counter-argument. No attempt to manage my perception of her. Just, I hear you. The first time she'd said something without trying to control where it landed. And for whatever reason, that mattered to me more than any of the longer messages had. It was the first time she'd been fully present with something I'd said without immediately trying to redirect it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. About 3 months after that, nearly 5 months since I'd walked out, I ran into her. Of all the predictable things that happen after a breakup in a city of millions, we ended up at the same small art show in Williamsburg on a Friday night. Carrington had invited me. Small gallery, exposed brick, the kind of gathering that's half art and half excuse to be around interesting people. I saw her before she saw me. She was across the room, near a large abstract piece on the east wall. She looked good. She always looked good. She was talking to someone, laughing, her hands moving the way they always did when she was animated. And I noticed something interesting about my own reaction. Nothing lurched in my chest. No sudden awareness of my own heartbeat. No impulse to leave. No impulse to approach her either, at first. I just saw her. The way you see someone you used to know. With warmth, actually, but without longing. And the distance between those two things, warmth without longing, felt like the clearest evidence that something in me had genuinely changed. She spotted me about 10 minutes later. Her expression shifted, surprise first, then something more complicated underneath it. Something that looked like it was working out what to do. She walked over. Hey, she said. Hey, I said. This is weird, she said. A little, I agreed. You look good, she said. Thanks. So do you. A pause settled between us. Not uncomfortable exactly. Just honest. Are you, she started. I'm good, I said before she could finish the question. Yeah. Yeah. She looked at me for a moment. Not calculating exactly. More like she was searching for something in my face and finding that it wasn't there. You seem different, she said finally. Different how? She thought about it. She actually took a moment to think about it, which was more than I expected. Settled, she said. Like you're not waiting for anything anymore. That landed differently than I expected. Not because it hurt, because it was accurate. And the fact that she could see it, that it was visible from the outside, something she could name precisely, told me that the old version of me had been carrying something I hadn't fully understood I was carrying. A permanent low-level tension. The tension of someone who is always half-waiting, who has never quite fully arrived because part of him is always checking whether the other person is still there, still choosing him, still interested, still worth staying for. And losing that tension didn't feel like triumph. It felt like silence. The good kind. The kind you only notice when you've been living with noise so long you forgot what quiet was supposed to feel like. Yeah, I said. I think that's about right. She nodded slowly. I'm glad, she said. And I think she meant it. In the sincere, bittersweet way that people mean things when they're looking at a decision they can't unmake. Take care of yourself, I said. Same words as the last time, but completely different weight. The first time they'd been an ending. This time they were just a goodbye. She smiled. A real one. The kind I'd seen from her rarely. Not the magnetism, not the performance, just her. You too, she said. And we moved in different directions through the room. Around 8 months in, she tried one more time. A voice memo. Long one. She must have figured I'd be more likely to listen than to read. And she was right. I did listen. The whole thing twice. She sounded different from the text. Less constructed. Like she was talking in real time rather than drafting. She said she'd started therapy. She said she'd been learning things about herself that she'd been avoiding for a long time. Things about her attachment, about the way she'd learned growing up to withdraw when things got emotionally demanding, about how she'd turned intimacy into a performance she could walk off stage from when it felt like too much. She said she understood now that her question, the one, had been a defense mechanism, a way of making my pain feel small so she didn't have to feel responsible for it. She said she was sorry. Not, "I'm sorry if you felt that way." Not, "I'm sorry but you have to understand." Just, "I'm sorry." Full stop. I sat with it for a long time. Days. Because she sounded like she meant it. I believed she'd done real work. I believed she was genuinely sorry. And I also knew that none of that changed what I felt. Or rather, what I didn't feel anymore. I sent her a message. Short. Honest. I told her the voice memo meant something to me. I told her the work she was describing was real, and she should be proud of herself for doing it. I told her I meant it when I said there was no anger. I said it one more time because I wanted her to be sure. And then I said the thing I'd been turning over for weeks. "The problem was never that you were a bad person," I wrote. "The problem was that I stopped being myself around you. I spent almost 2 years adjusting the size of what I felt to fit what you seemed willing to receive. And I can't go back to that. Not because of punishment. Not because I don't care about the good things we had. But because some versions of a relationship leave marks on you. And one of the marks this one left is that I know, now, what it costs to keep shrinking. I'm not willing to pay that anymore. I hope you build something great," I wrote. "I genuinely do." She responded the next day. "I know. Thank you for saying it that way." That was the last thing we ever said to each other. Romilly asked me, months later, how I knew it was really over. Not in a romantic way. She'd just ended something herself and was trying to understand the mechanics of actually letting go versus just leaving. "How did you know it was done for real?" she said. "Like actually done, not just done for now." I thought about it seriously. When I stopped editing myself to fit the space she was willing to give me, I said. She frowned a little. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," I said, "I spent almost 2 years calibrating my feelings to match what she seemed comfortable receiving. Too much hurt. I'd minimize it before I even finished feeling it. Too much enthusiasm. I'd dial it back so I didn't seem like I was too invested. Too much need for consistency. I'd convince myself I was being unreasonable. And the day she asked me why I was acting like it mattered so much, that was the day I finally heard myself." "Heard yourself how?" Romilly said. "Like from outside," I said. "Like someone held up a mirror and I saw exactly what I'd been doing. And once you see it clearly, you can't maintain the performance anymore." "You mean you couldn't forgive her?" "No," I said. "It wasn't about forgiveness. I forgave her fine. I just stopped being available." "There's a difference," I said. "Forgiveness is about the past. Availability is about the future, and I stopped being available." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a really clean way to end something," she said. "Yeah," I said. "It took me a while to find it." Collins told me, a little while after that Aloan was seeing someone new, that she seemed genuinely happy. "Good," I said, without effort, without the asterisk of, "but I hope she learns her lesson first." Just good. I'm in it completely. I hope she's built something real. I hope she's present for it. I hope she never asks someone else why they're acting like they matter so much. Because the answer to that question is the same for every person who's ever loved someone. The answer is, because I do. Because I'm here. Because I opened myself to this, and that act of opening costs something and deserves to be taken seriously. That's the whole answer. It doesn't require a speech. It doesn't require explanation. It just requires someone who looks at the opening and says, "I see that. I see you. This matters to me." I think about that question sometimes. Not the way I used to. Not with the sting attached. Not with the compulsive replaying quality of something that burrowed under your skin. More like the way you'd remember a specific intersection. A moment where one choice leads to more of the same, and another leads somewhere you couldn't have imagined yet. Why are you acting like this matters so much? I've turned it over 100 times. And what I keep coming back to is this. She asked it like the answer should have been obvious. Like the correct response was to recognize that I was being disproportionate. But what the question actually exposed, what it laid bare without meaning to, was the gap between how she saw me and how I'd been seeing myself. I had been showing up as a full person, with full feelings, bringing my whole self to something. And she had been receiving maybe half of it, managing the overflow, filing the excess. And when the excess finally had nowhere to go, it came out as a conversation I needed to have. And her response to that conversation was to question the legitimacy of the need itself. That's not cruelty. I keep coming back to that. That's not someone who wants to hurt you. That's someone who has never been taught to hold other people's feelings as equal in weight to their own, who has always, maybe without even knowing it, decided at a cellular level that their comfort takes precedence. And you can have compassion for that and still choose not to be the person who absorbs it anymore. Both things are true. I have compassion for her, and I chose not to absorb it anymore. Why are you acting like this matters so much? What I know now, with all the distance I have from it, is that it mattered because I mattered. Because the version of me who stays quiet and absorbs the dismissal and edits himself smaller and smaller, that version dies slowly. Not all at once. Not in a way anyone could point to. Just incrementally, one swallowed moment at a time. Until one day you look at your own life and realize you've been living in someone else's margins. And the version of me who smiled, who said nothing, who picked up his jacket and walked out, that version survived. He went home. He sat in the dark for a while. He rebuilt his life in small, ordinary ways that added up to something that felt like his own. He found his gravity again. I'm not going to tell you I'm in some perfect place now. That would be a clean ending, but it wouldn't be honest. I still sometimes pick up my phone expecting a notification that isn't there from someone who no longer sends them. I still sometimes catch myself starting to minimize something before I've even fully felt it. Old reflex, well-worn groove. But I catch it now. I notice the moment I start to make myself smaller. And instead of finishing the edit, I pause. I let the feeling be as big as it actually is. I don't apologize for it. I don't rush to explain it. I just let it take up its real amount of space. And that practice, that specific thing, of letting feelings be their actual size, has changed more than I know how to explain. Not because it feels dramatic. It doesn't. It feels quiet. Like living in a room that's the right size for you. Like finally, not waiting to be invited into your own life. Settled, Sheets said. You seem settled. Like you're not waiting for anything anymore. She was right. I'm not waiting for anything. I'm just here. Present. Full-sized. Unedited. Finally just here. And that is everything. The last thing I'll say about all of it is this. The moment I walked out of her apartment, I didn't know what I was walking toward. I had no plan. No replacement relationship waiting. No grand reinvention already underway. I just had the absence of something that had been taking up too much space for too long. And in that absence, in that quiet, slightly terrifying openness, I found something I hadn't expected. Myself. Just exactly that. Nothing poetic about the finding of it. Nothing cinematic. Just me. Standing in my own apartment. In the dark. Completely still. And for the first time in almost 2 years. Not waiting. Not adjusting. Not shrinking. Just me. Taking up the whole room. Some doors don't close with a slam. They close with a smile. And once they're shut, no amount of knocking reaches you. Because you're already somewhere else. Already whole. Already gone.